What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today we're going to be talking about some fairly big and concerning news for the future of Battlefield 6. And this has to do with them removing a bunch of the game modes from the game. And I'm not talking about the typical limited time game modes that we expect to come and go. I'm talking the core base game modes that launched with the game and have been a staple of the game since launch. Now recently, within the past couple weeks, you may have noticed that they removed Rush as well as King of the Hill. And we obviously saw quite a few unhappy people with that, especially with the removal of Rush. However, now, just today, people are logging on and noticing that everything has been removed from the custom search options aside from Conquest, Escalation, Breakthrough, and Obliteration. And then outside of custom search, we now have Operation Augur back for a limited period of time. We also have Casual, Breakthrough, and then we just have the redundant mode, so we have Conquest and Escalation. Those are also available through the custom search. And we have Breach and Destroy, which is just a rotation of Breakthrough and Obliteration, so also redundant since those are available in custom search. And that's it. Those are the available game modes to play right now. So that means all of these small player count modes like Team Deathmatch, Domination, as I said, King of the Hill, Squad Deathmatch as well, those are gone. You can't play those anymore, at least with official matchmaking. You can technically access at least many of those through Portal, but good luck actually finding a match there. And this is obviously quite a serious issue, and it's very concerning. And one of the reasons this is such a big issue is these are core game modes that were advertised with the game. They launched with the game, not as limited time modes, but as core modes in the game. And for many of them, they're actually tied in with base challenges in the game. And that means at the moment, those base challenges for base items that launch with the game cannot be completed because you can't play those game modes. And I know some might say like the game's almost a year old now, so if you really wanted to complete them by now, you probably would have, but that doesn't account for new players, and it's also just the principle of the issue. That's base game content that you can no longer reasonably access, and the game isn't even a year old yet. That's unacceptable and shouldn't be tolerated because that sets a terrible precedent for games going forward. Like the bare minimum they should have done there is those items should now all just be awarded to everybody if it requires you to play a game mode that's no longer available to be played. But that still doesn't account for the fact that many people may have bought this game specifically because maybe they liked the small map modes, for instance. And I know some of the more hardcore Battlefield audience will be like, too bad, that's not real Battlefield, but what about Rush? Rush is absolutely a core Battlefield game mode, and that was removed as well. And you might have actually seen the news recently of a player that had 470 hours in the game, and he was actually able to get a full refund for the game on Steam lately because of the removal of Rush, as that was the mode that he played almost exclusively since the launch of the game, and it was just taken away from him. So good on Steam for doing that. I suspect that's not going to be something that everybody's going to be able to do. It's probably a one-time exception that they made for him. But I think that's a totally valid reason for a refund in this case, because they removed a core part of the game that was advertised with the game and tied in with the in-game challenges as well. And so I think that same principle should apply to all of these other game modes removed as well. Now on this topic, we did actually get a post from the developers 4 days ago, so this is before the removal of all these recent game modes. This was just after they removed Rush as well as King of the Hill. And with this, they said, "We've seen your feedback on the recent playlist changes and understand the concerns around matchmaking, missing modes, and changes to custom search. The recent playlist adjustments weren't made lightly. Our goal is to improve matchmaking quality by focusing players into the playlist seeing the most activity, creating more consistent matches that fill, and getting our players into the action faster. While this means some playlists are no longer always available, the intent is to create more consistent matches across Battlefield 6. We've seen some questions about why certain custom options disappeared. The current system requires custom search filters to be tied directly to active playlists, and as a result, when a playlist is rotated out, its corresponding custom search options are also temporarily unavailable. We recognize that some of the affected modes are community favorites, regardless of how often they're played. We want those experiences to remain part of Battlefield 6, and we're continuing to explore the best ways to bring them into matchmaking while expanding longer-term options like Portal verified modes and the server browser." They then said, as part of next week's rotation, King of the Hill will return as part of an active playlist and will show up in custom search. We're also bringing back Operation Augur, which is now back today, and they mentioned that'll be back for 1 week, and the remaining issues affecting it have been resolved. Thank you for continuing to share your feedback. We're closely monitoring the impact of these playlist changes and will continue making adjustments when they're needed. We'll keep you updated as we have more to share. So with that, it does look like these modes that they've removed, they do plan on bringing back going forward as perhaps limited time options. So it's not like we'll never have access to play them again in the game, but they're not going to be permanent options anymore. And on one hand, I do understand where they're coming from when it comes to improving matchmaking quality and creating more consistent matches across the game. I mean, one of my biggest complaints with this game over the past quite a few months now has been the fact that I get into so many lobbies that are filled with bots. Part of that is due to the time of day that I play and perhaps my region. I do tend to play like during office hours usually because my job is content, so I am working during the day. But even then, I shouldn't be getting into so many lobbies that are just full of bots when I'm just trying to play regular Battlefield and not the casual breakthrough mode where bots are expected. And yes, this happens even with crossplay enabled. In saying that though, this just doesn't seem like the right way to handle this situation. And in my eyes, at least in theory, there are significantly better solutions to these issues. Now, one crazy thing here too is if you look at the Steam player count, which is just one of several platforms that you can play Battlefield on, the player count actually seems to be quite healthy overall, and it should be more than enough to be supporting all of the game modes that we previously had in the game, to where you should be able to find matches that aren't full of bots, for instance. However, one big thing I think many people fail to consider is RedSec is included in these numbers, and with RedSec being free to play, I would guess a fairly large portion of that player count is not actually playing multiplayer at all. They're not in the multiplayer rotation, they're just playing the RedSec stuff. And so I think that definitely skews the perception of the multiplayer player counts to a degree. Either way, this is where I want to talk about what I feel would be the better solutions. Keeping in mind, of course, I'm not a developer, I don't have access to all the same data that they have. But it just seems obvious, at least from a player's perspective, one of the biggest things that I think would solve so many of the issues with matchmaking and lobbies needing to be populated with bots, this is persistent servers. So when a game ends, instead of kicking you back into matchmaking and having to start the whole process from scratch, that server would just continue with all of the same players that were in the previous match. Of course, if you want to leave at that point, there's nothing stopping you from leaving. But if you decide to stay, then it just continues on with a set map rotation into the next game, and it keeps all of those same players around. In theory, that should help better consolidate the players within that game mode rather than breaking it up after every match, and then, from what I've seen at least, often forming a bunch of brand new lobbies from those players that all got broken up. Like a lot of the times, I find myself maybe starting a match with a bunch of bots there, and over time, throughout the course of the match, it fills with real players eventually, and by the end of the match, it's almost entirely real players in there. But then when it disbands and forces me to search again, it just immediately forms a new lobby, and now new people have to join me, and I might see some of the same people that were in the previous lobby, but obviously not all of them, and then it just populates with bots, and I'm back to square one, starting off the match, full of bots, and then having to wait until a good portion of the match is already completed before it's filled with real players again. And that wouldn't have been an issue if the lobby just stuck together and all of those real players that were there at the end of that match just move on to the next match. Sure, some of them would funnel out, those spots can get filled up, and hey, you can even fill up a few of those spots with bots if needed. That's totally cool, but at least if they were to do that, new games would be almost entirely populated with real players and we wouldn't have this bot issue present. Now, additionally, another problem that this in theory would help a lot with is the match quality. Another major complaint I've been seeing in the community a lot lately is tons and tons of blowout matches where there is just no chance of one team winning and the other team just absolutely demolishes you, or vice versa. You're on the team that just absolutely demolishes, which can be very unrewarding and quite boring. And I do think at least part of the cause of this is the fact that so many lobbies start off populated with a bunch of bots, and they need to just be filling players in partway through the match. And in that process, it's not always able to properly balance the teammates out, because on the fly, in the middle of the match, they have to decide which of those teams you're going to be populating into and replacing a bot with. And I don't think they do a very good job with that because they don't have all of the players' data available up front. And then from there, with all of the available information, they can try to balance the teams out appropriately based on the skill level of the players there. You can't really do that in the same way if players are just joining on the fly. Sure, they can say like, okay, this team needs a little bit of help. This is a good player. We're going to put them on that side rather than this side. But that only goes so far. Whereas if you're starting off the match with mostly real players, in theory, they should be able to balance those teams out significantly better. So that should also help alleviate that major issue when it comes to match quality. Now, oftentimes when this is brought up, having these persistent servers, the pushback you often see is, what if you have different custom search options? So you have multiple modes selected and maybe a small handful of maps. If it's a persistent server, what if I wanted to play a different one of the game modes that I had checked off in my custom search? Or what if it's a map that comes up that I didn't have selected? And some will say this is why they need to break up lobbies after every match. But to that, I just say, too bad. This introduces so many more problems than it solves, and that little bit of convenience of always making sure that you only get access to the modes that you have checked off and the maps that you have checked off, that is not worth it for all the downsides this introduces. And if you really want to search again with your custom search parameter after every match, you can manually back out and do that for yourself. Otherwise, you can stick with it. It'll be that one game mode that you got into, and it will go through a rotation of the maps regardless of which maps you had checked off in your custom search. Like I said, I think that would solve so many of the issues with the matchmaking and match quality in this game. That's been a huge piece of feedback since the beta of the game, and yet we still don't have that available. As for the next big potential solution here, which is coming eventually later in Season 5, this is a proper server browser that's actually tied in with the matchmaking as well. So I'm not talking about portal servers, I'm talking about official servers where you can either join them by going through a server browser, seeing the map, the mode, your connection, and how many players are in that lobby, and then deciding for yourself to manually join that. Or you could potentially end up in that exact same server, in that exact same game, if you just wanted to hit the matchmake button. If I just wanted to search for a game of Conquest, it could put me into that as well. I think it's important to be tying those two systems together to, again, help consolidate those players. It would just then give the player the option to either sort through that manually or have the convenience of just hitting a button and getting placed into that. Like I said, this is coming later in Season 5, so we're looking at toward the end of the year, we will likely see this. And that's another thing that I think would really help alleviate so many of the issues we're seeing with matchmaking here. Although I've got to say with that, I'm very concerned about their potential implementation of this based on the wording they used in a community update from a little while back. With this, when talking about the server browser that's coming, they mentioned they're exploring how the server browser can support a more persistent match flow, making it easier to remain with other players between rounds and complement the existing matchmaking experience. To me, that doesn't sound like they're just going to have straight up persistent servers from one game to the next alongside this server browser. Instead, to me, that still seems like they're investigating how they can still have it their way, which is breaking up the lobbies, but maybe finding a middle ground somehow that will likely just overcomplicate things and introduce new issues that will probably take another handful of months for them to explore solutions to when those issues could have been anticipated from the beginning and avoided entirely if they just kept it simple and gave us exactly what we've been asking for, which is a proper server browser integrated with matchmaking and fully persistent servers. I really don't think any of these matchmaking issues and the whole bot fill issue would have been a problem at all if they would have just listened to the community early on in the beta when we were outlining the importance of these systems for the game. Instead, they seem to ignore it. If I had to guess, this was in order to chase metrics via algorithmic control, and then on top of that for server cost efficiency because they can spin them up as needed. But how is that all working out for them now? It really doesn't seem like that's paying off in the long run, as I feel this has led to so many issues with the game that have pushed so many players away from the game that otherwise would still be happily playing. It's just such a shame to see things in the state that they are in right now because at the moment, most of my issues with this game don't even have anything to do with the gameplay itself. Sure, I've got some gripes, I've got some feedback for some of the gameplay, but generally speaking, the friction I experience with this game isn't even related to the gameplay. It's almost entirely surrounding how they've handled this whole matchmaking situation. And that's just so frustrating to see because we saw these issues coming from a mile away, and yet they're still exploring solutions almost a year later. So those are my thoughts on this whole situation. I really think all of this could have been avoided. I think they are rightfully getting a lot of backlash for removing those modes, but I also feel like they have backed themselves into a corner and it's kind of what they have to do right now to stop the bleeding. But that just introduces all of these new concerns and issues. I think in the meantime, the better band-aid fix to just removing these modes entirely would be to just combine some of them and create mosh pits. So, like the fact that they removed literally all of these small mode playlists, like Team Deathmatch, Domination, King of the Hill, that's kind of crazy that they just got rid of all of them instead of combining them all into a small mode mosh pit. So while you may not be able to always choose the exact one of those small modes that you play at any given time, at least you can throw yourself into a mosh pit of those small modes and potentially get the mode that you want to get. It's not the perfect solution. Like I said, it's just a band-aid fix, and it definitely would lead to a lot of lobby shopping, so people would keep backing out until they get the mode that they want to see. But at least there would be an option to play that mode. Now, based on their wording in that post that we went over earlier, I actually suspect this might be what we're seeing with King of the Hill returning, because they did mention it will return as part of an active playlist. So I do hope that's the route they're going to be going for, at least in the short term, while they can get things worked out here. And I think it should be a similar story with Rush. I think we should have an attack and defend playlist where we have Rush and Breakthrough together in that mode. You could even throw Obliteration into that for a rotation of 3 of them, just to make sure you're at least offering the potential to play all of those modes. Again, even though it's not the 100% ideal long-term fix. So I'm curious to see how things are going to play out with this over time. Overall, I'm still enjoying the gameplay of Battlefield 6. It's just frustrating to see these issues pop up. And this is where I want to hear from you guys in those comments down below. How do you feel about the fact that they've removed so many of the game modes that were core game modes with this game at launch? Just let me know all of those thoughts down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.